Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt-Along. Today we're going to be stitching straight lines and matrix. It's kind of that wiggly grid design over a basket block. These are my favorite blocks of the entire quilt-along because I love baskets. I love that traditional piecing design. So we're going to learn how to quilt this block in a really cool way. So let's get started. So here's our quilting design, and you can see these wiggly lines of matrix and our straight lines really coming together to make this basket look almost woven in appearance. As for how I've prepped this block, I started by stitching it in the ditch. As I kind of stitched this line, I went on ahead and outline quilted that handle. Because that handle is appliqued, it's technically kind of on top, on the surface of the block. So just outline quilt it, stitch right next to it. As you go around, that'll secure it nicely. And then I started knocking out these lines, and I also knocked out these ditch lines as I went, stitching along these straight lines and just travel stitching along the ditches whenever I needed to. I've also knocked out this center section too. So we have this area to fill, and we also need to knock out our matrix. Now, matrix is an edge-to-edge design, which means that you're always kind of stretching this from edge to edge along your quilt. It usually works really, really easily. So down here, this is going to be very, very quick to fill. But when you have something to jump across, such as this basket handle, it can get a little tricky. So we're going to end up having to travel stitch inside, knock out the center section, and then quilt around it. And I think it's really important to go on ahead and mark this. It's very hard to freehand quilt something that flows. You can see how this line, this wiggle kind of wiggles in and it flows through that area. It's very hard to stitch this freehand with no marks because a lot of times what will happen is you're stitching it one way inside and then you get on the outside and you don't match up those lines and it just looks funny. So I would really encourage you to mark these lines of quilting on your block. And just in case you're looking for this design, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern at leahday.com. So let's get started. So here I've knocked out those two triangles with our straight lines. I've done a lot of stitching in the ditch already, and I'm just filling in this last triangle with the back and forth straight lines. And basically all you want to do is just carefully guide the block straight through your machine. I really do think it's nice to have the block facing you, that straight line facing you. I usually do my travel stitching, it's just a 1/4 inch travel stitching, so you can usually get away with not rotating. But when I'm stitching especially longer straight lines and I want them to come out really nice and straight, then I will rotate the block so it's facing me as I stitch that. So it's just some back and forth travel stitching. Another travel stitching along the edges and then rotating and stitching those straight lines. Another tip for stitching straight lines in free motion: try keeping your right hand set up kind of parallel to your needle. See how my index finger is parallel, so as I'm pushing straight forward, then the block will move straight and the line will stay straight, all at the same time. As the lines get shorter, this may feel easier, and it may also be open to you to stitch just backwards. Instead of having to rotate, you can just stitch backwards. That can be tricky though, it just really depends on what angles your machine likes to stitch in more than anything else. I've got one last little line and then that area will be completely filled up. And so really all those triangles are filled the same way, just those repetitive lines, careful travel stitching along the edges. And I really think that this is another thing that's important to mark, just so you have nice accurate placement of those lines. Of course, if you don't like how close they are together, just mark every other line on your block, and that will keep things a little bit more open, a little less dense. Okay, so now I'm travel stitching over. I've stitched a little bit of matrix, so I just want to match up with that and keep going with it. It's just a little wiggly line. Stitch along the outer edge and then flow up with the next line. And this line stretched all the way across that corner. So now I'm going to stitch down and finish up that corner. The nice thing about matrix is you really can flow back and forth. Now I'm going to go the opposite direction. That's a pretty long area to travel stitch, so I'm going to rotate so I can stay right in that ditch. If you get lost in this design, just kind of take a look at it, stop. Matrix can easily become kind of a confusing texture. And if you forget what line you're stitching on, just take a minute to look at it and I'm sure you'll get back on track. And now at this point I kind of want to just take a look at the block. I want to get in here and knock out some of the middle section. So I've got this line and that'll connect me with the block and I can just travel stitch in and knock out this whole section all in one go. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave a wide angle with this so you can really see my hand placement really well. How I rotate the block at times. Right now I had to slow down quite a bit right there because I was running up against a lot of seam allowances underneath the quilt block. Very careful stitching also around that handle, because the handle is setting up on the surface of the quilt block. It's setting up on the surface, so that might also impact your presser foot too. And when I say that impact your presser foot, what I mean is it might press against your presser foot a little bit and cause it to lift, making it slow down as you're stitching. You just need to adjust your speed and be mindful of that can happen. Now this time I'm taking a more of approach of kind of stitching these lines, whatever's the closest. I'm minimizing my travel stitching by, I stitched that wiggly line, then the closest line I could connect with was this line, and I stitched that all the way across, did just a little bit of travel stitching up here, and then the next closest line is this one. So you can kind of go back and forth like this, and that's nice too. You don't have to do all of the horizontal lines and then all of the vertical lines. You can mix it up as much as you like. As I'm filling, I'm also looking at what little lines I need to knock out, and I've got some little lines in here that I might forget about, so I want to make sure I knock them out completely. I really hate it when I stitch through an area and I think I got it all knocked out. I've got everything stitched, and then I go back and look at it and realize that I forgot one single line right in the middle of it. That drives me crazy. So one of those neurotic things. I'm always double and triple checking myself to make sure I haven't missed a line or two in any area. Especially if you've finished your entire quilt, it's really a pain to have to put it back on the machine and go back into that area just for one single little line of thread. Like if I missed that single line, that would be pretty noticeable. So now I'm carefully travel stitching. You can hear my needle making a louder noise as it stitches through multiple layers of fabric and thread. If you find that your thread breaks when you try and stitch over multiple seam allowances or multiple layers, it might just be a sign that your thread is a little thick or a little weak for the job. I use isocord simply for this reason. I need to be able to stitch lots of lines of quilting, and I need to be able to travel stitch as much as I need to, so that's why I use this thread. It enables me to quilt the way I want to quilt. So now I'm back on the outside. I haven't missed, well, let's just double check just to be completely sure. Did I miss any lines in there? It's really a good idea, a good habit to get into, to flip up your quilt and just take a look at it, and it looks pretty good, so I'm happy with that. And now I can get back to just filling the entire outer area with as little travel stitching as possible. However, I'm going to have some. There's no avoiding it. So, oops, this is an area of a lot of seam allowances right here. This has happened a lot in the last couple of blocks we've been working on. There's a lot of seam allowances right there, so I'm going to rotate. I'm going to stitch very slowly. I'm literally stitching one stitch at a time and carefully pushing the block with my fingertips to get it right in there. And now I'm going to try and get out of that section just as fast as I can. Well, I guess I should say in slow motion, because that wasn't very fast, but at the same time I didn't horse around, I didn't try and go stitch something else. I just got out of that area and went to the next logical place I could. So we've got just a few lines in this corner, and I think I'm going to speed up the video at this point and show you how all of this fills and flows through the outer section of the basket, so you can see that how I move through it in free motion. I really hope that you enjoyed learning these straight lines and matrix within this basket block. These are pretty intense designs, and particularly in the way they're placed and the way that they're stitched around this basket block, I think the easiest way of doing this is to mark all of the lines and stitch on the marked line. A lot of times I hear quilters ask, well, is marking the design cheating? Is that somehow less or bad when it comes to quilting? And no, absolutely not. They're two different skill sets. We need to know how to quilt on the marked lines. We need to know how to stitch in the ditch. We need to know how to quilt along the edge of an applique. We need to have those skills. We also need to be able to stitch freehand when we want to, and to be able to, pick and choose when those times are. For me personally, when I have to kind of line something up, and particularly when I have to stitch an edge-to-edge design, which matrix is, something that's ranging from one edge to the other and it's kind of flowing through an area, and I got something blocking it, like that basket handle, I'm going to mark it. And I don't care what people say about cheating or not cheating. That is easier, and it's going to cause a whole lot less headaches and that need to rip and perfect something later. So I definitely would mark this. That's why I marked it and stitched on all the lines. There's been times in this quilt-along that I've tried to cheat and kind of make my process of prepping my blocks easier by not marking. But this is one block that I already knew. I glanced at it and I knew I had to have all of those lines marked ahead of time. So I hope that helps you, and certainly never feel bad about stitching on a marked line. It is a skill, a worthy skill to build, and you're going to be able to do so many amazing things with it, I promise. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and join us as we learn how to piece and free motion quilt 42 beautiful blocks together. You can pick up your pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.